a photo of a fallen soldier in 1944. When enlarged, experts reveal his incredible story. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss any new videos. The air conditioning at the National World War II Museum in Washington, D.C. hummed softly as Alina Rodriguez reviewed the dusty archive boxes. As a historian specializing in war conflicts, she had seen thousands of wartime photographs. But something about this image made her stop. The black and white photograph showed a young American soldier fallen in a French trench. His uniform was torn. His military helmet lay several meters away, and his closed eyes suggested a life cut short in 1944. However, something about the composition of the image disturbed Alina. "Where did this photo come from?" she murmured, turning it over. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "Unknown soldier, Normandy, France. August 15, 1944. There was no name, no identification number, no reference to a military unit. Alina switched on the high-resolution lamp and placed the photograph beneath the glass. In her 15 years as a historian, she had learned that the most ordinary images often concealed the deepest secrets. Using a magnifying glass, she examined every detail: the belt buckles, the uniform buttons, the marks on the helmet. Then she saw it. In the upper left pocket of the uniform, barely visible, the edge of what appeared to be folded paper protruded a letter, perhaps. But what caught her attention most was a small insignia on the soldier's collar. That did not match the standard military divisions of the era. "This doesn't make sense," Alina whispered, her hands beginning to tremble slightly. Something about the photograph challenged everything she knew about World War II military documentation. The soldier appeared in no official record, and that insignia was a mystery she needed to solve. The next day, Alina arrived early at the museum's digital restoration laboratory. Her colleague, Marcus Thompson, an expert in historical preservation technology, was already calibrating the high-resolution scanner when she entered. The photograph wrapped carefully in tissue paper. "I need you to enlarge this image as much as possible without losing quality," Alina said as she unwrapped it, "especially this pocket area and this collar insignia." Marcus adjusted his glasses and studied the image. "What exactly are you looking for?" "Something that shouldn't be there," Alina replied, pointing out the anomalies she had noticed. "This soldier doesn't appear in any official record, yet his uniform contains elements that don't match known divisions." The digitization process took several hours. Modern technology allowed them to enlarge details that would have been impossible to see in 1944. While the machine worked, Alina reviewed military files on her laptop, searching for references to special operations or undocumented units in the Normandy region. "Ready?" Marcus announced, turning the screen toward her. "Maximum resolution. You can zoom down to the fabric thread level." Alina approached the screen and zoomed in on the uniform pocket. The letter was clearly visible now, with handwriting faintly discernible. But what truly took her breath away was the collar insignia. "My God," she murmured, leaning closer. The symbol was unlike anything she had seen in military manuals. An eagle with outstretched wings, but beneath it, instead of the usual American shield, a small French fleur-de-lis. "What does that mean?" Marcus asked, noticing her reaction. "I don't know," Alina admitted. "But it suggests this soldier wasn't who he appeared to be. This insignia points to some form of joint operation between American and French forests, something absent from official archives." Alina captured a screenshot of the enlargement and saved it to her research folder. She sensed she had uncovered something extraordinary, something that could alter the historical understanding of military operations. Later, the National Archives and Records Administration loomed beneath Washington's gray sky. Alina walked through its marble hallways with determination, carrying a folder containing the digital enlargements. She had arranged a meeting with retired Colonel James Mitchell. A specialist in World War II military records, Dr. Rodriguez greeted Colonel Mitchell, a gray-haired man with a rigid military bearing who stood upright despite his 80 years. "What have you found that has historians so intrigued?" he asked. Alina spread the enlargements across the consultation table. "This photograph shows a fallen soldier in Normandy in August 1944, but he doesn't appear in any official record. And this insignia," she said, pointing to the collar symbol. Colonel Mitchell put on his reading glasses and examined the images carefully. His expression shifted from professional curiosity to something deeper: recognition mixed with concern. "Where did you find this photograph?" he asked, without lifting his eyes from the enlargements. "In the museum archives." It was miscatalogued without any specific reference. Mitchell leaned back in his chair and looked at Alina seriously. "Doctor, what you're showing me, this insignia isn't from any standard military division. It's the symbol of an operation that officially never existed." Alina felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of operation?" "During the final months of 1944, there were rumors of a joint program between the American OSS and the French resistance. It was called Operation White Shadow. Selected American soldiers were infiltrated behind enemy lines, working directly with resistance cells." The colonel stood and walked to the window overlooking the National Mall. "The problem is that all records of that operation were classified indefinitely. Officially, it never happened. According to the archives, the soldiers who participated all died in conventional combat." "Are you saying this soldier was part of a covert mission?" "It's possible. And if so, his death in this photograph may have been fabricated away to protect his true identity while he continued operating in occupied territory." Alina looked at the photograph again with new eyes. The soldier, who had seemed so peaceful in death, now appeared to be someone acting, playing the role of a fallen man to protect something far more important. Sunset Manor, a nursing home in Virginia, smelled of antiseptic and wilted flowers. Alina walked down the main corridor to room 204, where Harold Hank Peterson lived, one of the last surviving veterans of special operations in France during 1944. At 98 years old, Hank still possessed a remarkably clear memory. When Alina showed him the enlarged photograph, his blue eyes filled with tears. "Jesus, it's him," he murmured in a trembling voice. "I never thought I'd see that face again." "You knew him?" Alina asked, moving her digital recorder closer. "Tommy Hartwell. That was his real name. We were 22 when they recruited us for Operation White Shadow." Hank took the photograph with shaking hands. "This picture was taken during his first covert mission in occupied territory." Alina felt a chill. "Are you saying he didn't die in that trench?" "Hell no. Tommy was the best actor in our group. He could play dead so convincingly that even German medics believed it." Hank smiled faintly. That was his specialty. He'd lie there motionless, and once the Germans moved on, he'd get up and continue the mission. What kind of missions? Deep infiltration. He spent weeks in occupied territory setting up communication networks with the French resistance. That letter in his pocket probably contained coordinates or coded contacts. Hank leaned back and closed his eyes. Tommy was from Chicago. He had a girlfriend named Mary and always talked about his family's bakery in Little Italy. After the war, he planned to go home and marry her. What happened to him? "That's the thing," Hank said, opening his eyes with pain. "The last time I saw him was in September 1944. He left for a mission near Paris and never came back. They told us he died in combat, but they never recovered his body." Alina felt the pieces beginning to fall into place. "Do you think he could have survived the war?" "I always hope so. Tommy was too smart and too careful to die easily. But after the war, when I tried to find him, it was as if he'd never existed. All the records were gone." The room fell silent as Alina absorbed the information. Tommy Hartwell was not just an unknown soldier. He was a living ghost, erased from official history to protect secrets that 70 years later were beginning to surface. The icy wind off Lake Michigan cut through Chicago's streets as Alina walked through the Little Italy neighborhood. She had flown from Washington with a single clue: the Hartwell family bakery Hank had mentioned. After searching historical business records, she located Hartwell's bakery on Taylor Street. Though it had closed decades earlier, a used bookstore now occupied the space, preserving some original features: white-tiled walls and a marble counter where bread and pastries had once been displayed. Alina entered and approached the owner, a middle-aged Italian man named Giuseppe Rosine. "Hartwell's bakery," Giuseppe repeated, stroking his gray beard. "Yes, my father bought this place from the Hartwell family in 1954. It was a very strange transaction." "Strange how?" "The family had disappeared during the war. The bakery had been closed since 1943, but when my father signed the papers, it wasn't with the original Hartwells, was with a lawyer representing a surviving heir who never appeared in person." Alina felt her heart race. "Do you know if any member of the Hartwell family survived the war?" "That's the strange part. Old neighbors always said Tommy Hartwell came back briefly after the war, but he looked different, thinner, darker hair. Some thought it wasn't really him." Giuseppe led her down to the bookstore's basement. "When we renovated years ago, we found some things the family left behind. I almost threw them away, but my wife told me to keep them in case someone ever came looking for information about the Hartwells." Among boxes of old books, Giuseppe pulled out a deteriorated leather suitcase. "Here it is. We never opened it out of respect for the family." Alina opened the suitcase carefully. Inside were family photographs, handwritten love letters addressed to "My Dear Mary," and personal documents. What affected her most was a family photograph from 1942 showing the Hartwell parents beside a young man who was unmistakably the same soldier from the wartime photograph. "Tommy Hartwell," Alina murmured. He really existed. At the bottom of the suitcase, wrapped in tissue paper, she found something that took her breath away: a small military insignia identical to the one in the enlarged photograph, the same eagle with the French fleur-de-lis. "What does this mean?" Giuseppe asked. Alina held the insignia up to the light. "I think it means Tommy Hartwell not only survived the war, but came home. But for some reason, he couldn't reclaim his old life." The search for Mary O'Connor, Tommy Hartwell's girlfriend, led Alina to the Chicago Tribune newspaper archives. Her full name appeared in the love letters found in the suitcase, and Alina needed to learn what had become of her after the war. The archive librarian, an elderly woman named Dorothy Chen, helped Alina review microfilms from 1945 to 1950. "Are you looking for obituaries, marriages, or general news?" Dorothy asked. "Any mention of Mary O'Connor?" She would have been between 20 and 25 at the end of the war. After hours of searching, Alina found what she needed: a small social note in the June 3, 1947 edition. "Mary O'Connor marries Robert Sullivan at St. Alonce's Church. The bride, a nurse at Mercy Hospital, met her husband during her volunteer service with war veterans." "Interesting," Alina murmured. "She married 2 years after the war ended. Why didn't she wait for Tommy?" Dorothy found more references. In 1948, Mary Sullivan Jr. was born, followed by 2 more children in 1950 and 1952. The Sullivan family appeared to have lived a normal life in a Chicago suburb until, in 1965, another notice caught Alina's attention: Robert Sullivan, public accountant, died unexpectedly at 43 years old. He is survived by his wife Mary and their 3 children. Widowed young, Dorothy said. It must have been hard raising 3 children alone. Alina continued searching and discovered something extraordinary in the 1967 archives: a brief local news item that made her hold her breath. Mary Sullivan reports encounter with supposed war veteran. The Lincoln Park widow contacted authorities after a man claiming to be Thomas Hartwell, presumed dead in France in 1944, appeared at her door. The man was escorted from the property by local police. Elena's heart raced. Is there more information about this incident? Dorothy reviewed the police records. Here it is. Police report dated March 15, 1967. A man approximately 45 years old, identifying himself as Thomas Hartwell, was found loitering near Mary Sullivan's residence in Lincoln Park. When Mrs. Sullivan saw him, she reportedly fainted from shock. The man was detained briefly and released when no charges were filed. Is there a physical description? Yes. Medium height, brown hair with premature gray, a visible scar on his left cheek, and a slight limp in his right leg. He spoke with a Midwestern accent, but with inflections suggesting time spent abroad. Elena looked at the 1942 photograph of Tommy Hartwell and imagined him 25 years later. The description matched exactly how the young soldier would have aged. What happened next? According to the report, the man told Mrs. Sullivan that he had been carrying out a mission that had finally ended and that he could now return home. She insisted her fiancé had died in the war and that she had rebuilt her life. Elena closed her eyes, picturing the tragedy of that moment. Tommy Hartwell had returned after more than 20 years, only to find that the world he had left behind no longer existed. Back in Washington, Elena knew she needed access to classified OSS archives. She contacted Senator Richard Hayes, who had supported several museum research projects and held influence on intelligence committees. Dr. Rodriguez, Senator Hayes said from his Capitol office, "What you're asking is extraordinarily difficult. The Operation White Shadow archives have remained classified for 80 years. Senator, I believe we have evidence that an American soldier was kept in covert operations for more than 20 years after the war ended. His family believed him dead. His girlfriend married another man. He lived as a ghost." Elena presented all the evidence she had gathered, the enlarged photographs, Hank Peterson's testimony, the bakery artifacts, and the record of the 1967 encounter with Mary Sullivan. Senator Hayes studied the documents carefully. Are you suggesting the CIA kept this man on active missions throughout the Cold War? It's the only logical explanation. Tommy Hartwell was an expert in deep infiltration. During the Cold War, those skills would have been invaluable for operations in Eastern Europe. After several days of negotiation, Senator Hayes secured limited access to recently declassified archives. Elena found herself in a secure room inside a federal building, with a security officer monitoring every document she examined. The files confirmed her deepest suspicions. Operation White Shadow had not ended with World War II. It had evolved into something far larger, a network of sleeper agents, operating across Europe during the early Cold War. Years. Thomas H. Hartwell appeared in multiple reports between 1945 and 1967. He had been in Berlin during the Soviet blockade, in Hungary during the 1956 revolution, and in Czechoslovakia during the Prague Spring. His specialty remained deep infiltration and the establishment of communication networks. A memorandum dated 1967 finally explained his release. Agent Hartwell requests termination of active service, citing operational fatigue and a desire for civilian reintegration. Recommendation: approve request with the condition of perpetual silence. Regarding past activities, Elena grasped the full tragedy. Tommy Hartwell had served his country for more than 20 years in missions that officially never existed. When he was finally released, the world he once knew no longer had a place for him. Elena later located Mary Sullivan Jr., Tommy Hartwell's former girlfriend's daughter, now 75 years old and living in a nursing home in Evanston. Mary Jr. agreed to meet Elena after hearing about the research by phone. My mother never spoke much about what happened in 1967, Mary Jr. said as she poured tea in the common room. But I remember she was deeply shaken for weeks. She said she had seen a ghost. Alina showed her the original photograph of the soldier, along with the digital enlargements. Did your mother ever tell you anything about Tommy Hartwell? Only that he was the love of her life before the war. She kept all his letters until she died in 1998, when I found them among her belongings. I finally understood why she rarely spoke about my biological father. Alina straightened in her chair. Your biological father. My official father was Robert Sullivan. He raised me as his own. But the dates never made sense. I was born in February 1948. Mary Jr. paused. Wait, that's not right. Let me think. Alina waited quietly as she recalculated. I was born in 1948. And my mother married Robert Sullivan in June 1947. If the man who appeared in 1967 was really Tommy Hartwell. Mary Jr. stopped, tears forming in her eyes. My God, do you think he came back briefly after the war? Did your mother keep anything else besides the letters? Alina asked. Mary Jr. left the room and returned with a wooden box. I found this after she died. I never understood what it meant. Inside was another military insignia, identical to the one Alina had seen before, along with a photograph of a middle-aged man, clearly Tommy Hartwell, but 20 years older. On the back, written in Mary O'Connor's handwriting, were the words, Tommy, Paris, 1965. See you soon. Your mother was in Paris in 1965. Yes, she said she won a church contest for a trip to Europe. But thinking back, she never entered contests. And when she returned, there was a sadness in her eyes that never left. Alina realized the story was even more complex than she had imagined. Tommy Hartwell and Mary O'Connor had maintained secret contact for decades. But Cold War realities had made it impossible for them to be together openly. With all the pieces finally assembled, Alina returned to Washington to write her final report. What she had uncovered went far beyond the story of an unknown soldier. She had found evidence of one of the most secret intelligence programs in American history. In her museum office, Alina organized the documents, photographs, and testimonies gathered over months of investigation. The original photograph of the fallen soldier now carried an entirely different meaning. Tommy Hartwell had not died in that trench in 1944. He had staged his death as part of an elaborate infiltration operation that continued for more than 2 decades. The letter in his pocket had contained resistance codes, and the unusual insignia had served as his credential within a covert spy network operating in absolute secrecy. In her report, Alina wrote, Thomas J. Hartwell represents a generation of American soldiers who sacrificed not only their lives, but their identities. Officially dead since 1944, he continued serving as an undercover agent during the most dangerous moments of the Cold War. The investigation revealed that Tommy had maintained secret contact with Mary O'Connor for decades, meeting her clandestinely in Paris in 1965, when he was finally released from his obligations in 1967. He tried to reclaim his former life, but the world had changed too much. His attempt to reconnect with Mary that year was the final act of a man who had lived as a ghost for 23 years. Alina wrote that Mary had rebuilt her life, had a family, and that publicly acknowledging Tommy would have compromised decades of classified operations. She included a recommendation in her report. Thomas J. Hartwell deserved recognition for his extraordinary service. His story illustrated the human cost of intelligence operations and the need to honor those who served in the shadows. The photograph that had begun as an image of an unknown soldier fallen in combat was now revealed as the portrait of a hero. who had lived multiple lives in service to his country, sacrificing his personal identity for national security. 6 months after completing her investigation, Alina received an unexpected call. It was from David Hartwell, a 60-year-old man living in Portland, Oregon, who had read an article about her research in the local newspaper. "Dr. Rodriguez," David said in a trembling voice, "I think Tommy Hartwell was my father." Alina flew to Portland that same week. David welcomed her into his home, a modest house filled with family photographs and military memorabilia. He was of medium height, with the same blue eyes and gentle smile Alina had seen in Tommy's photographs. "My mother was named Claire Morrison," David explained. "She was a nurse at a veterans hospital in Portland after the war. She always told me my father died in France, but she never gave details." David showed Alina a shoebox filled with letters. "I found these after my mother died in 2010. They're dated between 1948 and 1967, all signed with the initial T." Alina read the letters with growing intensity. They were written by Tommy Hartwell from various European cities, describing a life of loneliness and dangerous missions, yet always expressing his love for Claire and his desire to meet his son. In the last letter, David said he wrote that he had finally been released from his obligations and would come home. It's dated February 1967. Did he come? Yes. Years later, my mother told me that a man came to our door in March 1967. She had sent me to stay with my grandmother that week. When I returned, she was different satyr, but also more at peace. David led Alina to the garage where he had been restoring a classic car. "After reading your research, I searched my mother's attic and found this." It was a leather suitcase identical to the one Alina had found in Chicago. But this one contained more recent documents, passports under different names, photographs of Tommy in various European cities, and a final letter addressed to David. Alina read aloud, "My dear son, if you are reading this, you have finally discovered the truth about your father. I served my country for 23 years in missions that can never be publicly acknowledged. My greatest regret is not having known you, but my greatest pride is knowing you grew up to be a good man because of your mother." The letter continued, "I have left evidence of my service in a safe place. One day, when the time is right, the full story can be told. Until then, know that every day of my life after 1944 was lived with the hope of returning home to you and your mother." Alina finished reading with tears in her eyes. Tommy Hartwell had been the father of at least 2 children with 2 different women, both nurses who had cared for war veterans and both of whom had kept his secret for decades. What happened to him after 1967? Alina asked. David smiled sadly. "According to my mother, he spent his final years living in a small cabin in the Oregon mountains under the name Thomas Morrison. He died in 1987 and was buried in a local cemetery with a headstone that simply read, 'War Veteran.'" Alina visited Thomas Morrison's grave at Mount Hood Cemetery in Oregon. The plain headstone stood in stark contrast to the complexity of the life he had lived. Beside the grave, however, Alina discovered something that finally completed the circle of her investigation: fresh flowers and a small black and white photograph. It was the original image of the fallen soldier from 1944, but now Alina understood that it did not depict a death, but a rebirth. Tommy Hartwell had died that day so he could live as a ghost in service to his country, surrendering his personal identity for a greater cause. His story is not just about an unknown soldier, Alina wrote in her final report. It is about the human cost of secret service, about the men and women who live and die in the shadows to protect the freedoms we take for granted. The photograph, which had begun as a mystery in a museum archive, had become a testament to sacrifice, love, and patriotism. Tommy Hartwell had lived 3 lives: as a young baker from Chicago who fell in love with Mary O'Connor, as an undercover agent who worked in darkness for decades, and finally, as a father who could only meet his son in his final years. Alina arranged for the photograph to be displayed in the museum with a plaque that read, "To the unknown heroes who served in the shadows." It did not mention Tommy Hartwell's name, honoring the secrecy he had maintained throughout his life while recognizing his sacrifice and that of all who served as he did. David Hartwell donated his father's letters to the museum, where they would be preserved for future generations. Mary Sullivan Jr. did the same with her mother's belongings, creating a complete archive of a love story that had spanned decades and continents. The final entry in Elena's research journal read, "Sometimes the most extraordinary stories are hidden in the most ordinary images. A photograph can hold secrets that change our understanding of the past and remind us that the greatest heroes are those whose names we will never know." The photograph of the fallen soldier from 1944 had finally revealed its remarkable story. It was not an image of an ending, but of a beginning, the beginning of a life wholly devoted to service, sacrifice, and silent love for a country that could never publicly acknowledge his contribution. Tommy Hartwell had finally found his rest, but his legacy would endure in the museum archives, reminding every visitor that history is filled with anonymous heroes whose stories await those brave enough to look closer.